Hi everyone, welcome. Hope all of you are doing really well today. I wanted to talk about something today that is very close to my heart. And I think it's a subject that just doesn't get often talked about, or really, more importantly, we don't explore um, what results from growing up in an emotionally abusive, verbally abusive home. As a child, um, being the target of that verbal abuse. And when I say this is something very close to my heart, it is because that's how I grew up. I had a mother that had perfected um, the way to abuse verbally a child. And I, for some reason, was the target. I had a brother that was 5 years younger than me who never had that same experience with her. So she had all the energy to give it to me. My father would join in occasionally in the ridiculing aspect of the abuse, but the majority of it happened from my mother. And, I think there's levels. If you grew up in an abusive home, I think there's levels of emotional and verbal abuse. And I was at the top end. My mother was relentless in her ability to continue to abuse in that way. And there was nothing that was off limits to abuse me with or to ridicule me with. My mother had a habit, she would look for the weaknesses, particularly that I had, and then that would bring in the ridicule, and it was just unreal in terms of how that would continue to happen. As a young teenager, my father had a dry cleaning business, and I had this dream as a little kid, but also as I was getting older. I just wanted to be a working girl. And in those days, long time ago, I would see these young women dressed up, waiting for the bus to go to work. And I would think, oh, that's exactly what I want to do. That's what I want to be when I grow up. So I would beg my father, I want to come work with you. And so he would say, fine, you can come work with me. Well, part of the deal was I was supposed to give change, take the money and give change when somebody came in to pick up their dry cleaning. And I had trouble with it. I was never good at math, and we didn't have cash registers then that told you how much to give back. So oftentimes I was giving the wrong change. And the joke became in my family, this was the ridicule, and this was when my father joined in, of how stupid I was and how I couldn't give change, and how the days that I would go to work at my father's, he would lose money because I was at the cash register. And that would go on, and certainly didn't build my confidence. But you know what? I didn't stop going to work there because I was determined that I was going to do the things I want to do. And even though I was constantly being berated by my mother and my father at times, as I said, but certainly my mother for everything and any little thing that she could find, and this was on a daily basis for the 18 years I lived in that house, I had some kind of determination. I don't even know, a spirit, something inside of me that just knew that I was going to survive this. And, that led to me wanting always to prove myself that I could do something. And that's a whole other story of, it was the good and the bad, I could say, of what happened. One of the things as a result of that constant verbal abuse that I got from my mom. So why I bring that up is because there's all kinds of ways that this emotional abuse can take place within you as a child. and we all go different directions. It's the kind of thing, yes, that could lead to addictions, to drugs, alcohol, etc. It's similar, like sexual abuse, except that I think the piece that might not be there is the kind of promiscuous situation that can happen if you've been sexually abused. But the verbal abuse, it carries you into all kinds of different ways, addictions, etc. Anything to not have to feel it. And I used to say to myself, I'm not who they say I am. And I think that's what caused me down the road to want to always prove myself that I wasn't who they said I was. So I would constantly challenge myself to go after things that I was afraid of. And career-wise, I actually did a ton of things. And I would do them until a certain level of success that I was satisfied with, and I'd go try the next. And I was kind of relentless with myself in doing that. So there was no rest for me in that way. So even though I thought I was dealing with the results of what it was like to grow up as a kid with that constant abuse, I wasn't recognizing that it was also an addictive behavior that really maybe wasn't always serving me so well. And the other thing that I took on was perfection, that I had to look as perfect as possible, because this is the criticism that went on when I was a child, was how I didn't look perfect. And so I never saw it early on. Looking back now, many years later, I see how that played itself out. It wasn't like it created a terrible life for me. It was a pretty exciting life, but I can see how I was impacted and how I made choices during that time. Now, for me, what happened is I really got thrown into, through the experience that I had, when I say thrown into, I started with lots of therapy once I left that house, and also it threw me into kind of a spiritual journey, which I'm so happy it did. So going through lots and lots of therapy, trying to work through the results of what had happened. I mean, I had panic attacks, lots of anxiety. I definitely, phobias. I had lots of phobias. I never felt safe. I was always waiting for the other shoe to drop. So it was a very anxiety-driven way to go through life. So this is where a lot of the therapy came in. And then the spiritual side also came in as a place to go and kind of find places where I felt I could have help from guides, my guides, learn to meditate, which I did do daily. I got into yoga practice. I really went all different ways. I didn't ever get stuck, or shouldn't say stuck, I didn't get into one area and stay there. I kind of sampled everything and kind of then took what worked for me, took it with me, and left what didn't. So that was the route I took, and that is a route that's, I believe, served me really well. But I think had I been able to see early on how I was really deciding to make decisions or running my life, I probably could have saved myself a lot of sometimes heartbreak and pressure, and what do I want to say, had a more balanced, maybe even more peaceful life, because I also, maybe you've experienced this, some of you, I had this critical voice, my own critical voice, that of course I brought with me from childhood, which was pretty relentless with me, because I really, silly things in a way, like but I could never take a nap in the day, partially because my mother took naps and I wanted to absolutely always go the opposite. I always said I will never be like my mother, so I wanted to go the opposite direction from my mother, so I couldn't take naps. I still struggle with that today. But the critical voice says, you don't have time. You don't have time for a nap, get going. So you think you survive. I guess that's really what I'm trying to say. I'm kind of working through this as I'm talking on this video. You think you survived all the bad stuff that happened to you as a kid because you look pretty normal and you've been somewhat successful, talking about myself. So it kind of looks like I survived that. But at the end of the day, I didn't really work completely through it. I'm still doing that, actually, working through it. And the other thing that happened was my mother was extremely manipulative, and she had a lot of power over her particular side of the family, over her mother and over her sister. And those were the two people that I most thought of as my lifelines. Yes, it was my mother's mother, but my mother's mother wasn't like my mother. And the sister happened to be only 8 years older than I, so I used to think of her as my sister. I was really, really close to them. But as I became an adult, I would oftentimes just not talk to my mother. I said, no, I'm not talking to her. I can't deal with her. And my grandma and my aunt, the deal was in those days, I don't think the word emotional abuse or verbal abuse even existed. And it was more kind of brushed off as, oh, your mother's crazy. However, what my mother would do is the times that I didn't want to speak to her, which were many, she would then put so much pressure on my grandmother and my aunt to not speak to me, and that they'd give in, they'd cave. So if I wasn't speaking to my mother, the punishment was, you're not going to be able to speak or have anything to do with this side of the family. Eventually, I gave in, and because I just couldn't tolerate my mother, and I had to give in to losing the entire family. And that's a whole other story for another day. But these are just some of the things that can happen, and I think it's important if we're children of verbal abuse, a child of a verbal abusive environment, that we start to really dig deep into how maybe this has affected us, but we've not been able, willing, wanted to look at the results of that and how that may not be in our best interest. Things that we're doing today may not be in our best interest, but more because we're trying to deal with what happened in our childhood. And this is a big order. I don't think it's an easy thing to do. I think that if you're been a child that grew up in an environment like that, you know that there's, it's tough. It's tough to grow up in that and get out of there and then just look like you have somewhat of a normal life. One of my mother's mantras was, we're going to be on the street. This I heard every day. And I didn't even know what it meant when I was quite young. Well, I kind of never understood what it meant, because she would say these things to my grandmother. She would say these things all the time, but it never happened. So I got into this place of always waiting for the other shoe to drop, because, like I said, nothing changed in our household. My mother still had domestic help come in. Nothing changed, nothing. But every day, my mother would talk about, we're going to be on the street. In those days, you weren't seeing homeless people all over the place, thank goodness. So I didn't really know anybody that had been on the street, but it did create an anxiety in me, and that anxiety was waiting for the other shoe to drop. There's so many little things like that. If you look back on your own life, you'll begin to see or notice so many little things that are impacting you or causing you to be a certain way personality-wise, or act in a certain way, or not, not honor yourself. You know, I've noticed the other thing I've never learned to do is really nurture myself. Yeah, that's been a biggie. What happened, and also this is interesting, what happened as a result of all this, my mother not allowing, that sounds weird, but she making sure that my family didn't talk to me, and then not having any family. In fact, I lost everything, all families, and didn't reconnect until most recently. And I was with another, my father's side of the family, cousins actually, and I feel like I came, like I had amnesia, because I've lost so many years with the cousins. And the reconnect happened not because I had a problem with them, and actually my mother didn't have much to do with that side of the family, but I had moved away from the city that they lived in, and my father had died quite young, so I just didn't have contact with that side of the family. I didn't even know where they all were. So now that I've connected, I'm trying to do this catch up. Like I said, a person that's had amnesia, because I lost years and years and years, and it's very strange. And then I feel like I'm coming from another planet, like I don't know how to interact with family. In fact, it's always been when I've made friends or have friends throughout my adult life and worked with people, and sometimes a friend would say, "Oh, you're just like family to me," and I would freak out. I'd think, "Oh God, no, don't tell me that. I don't want to be just like family," because I saw it as such a negative thing. Again, this is everyday life stuff that we don't recognize where it came from. When I would say to friends, "I don't want to be, family," sometimes I didn't say it, but I just said it to myself. I didn't get it. I didn't get where that was coming from. I don't want to be family like I had family. But I didn't get that I would have this wall come down, I think, really. Like, I would only allow to get so close, evidently. And the idea of you're just like family would freak me out big time. So I'm kind of rambling on here, but I just wanted to kind of bring up this whole thing about if you grew up in a verbally abusive home and you were the target of that abuse, that I think is important to start to look at the ways in which maybe you're running your life, or just every day, small things, and start to try to put the puzzle together and say to yourself, I'm doing this because of, is this something that I'm doing that has nothing to do with the verbal abuse? Just start, all you have to do actually is start to get aware of the idea. Just get the intention in your mind that I want to see if I'm doing some things that are not in my best interest, and I'm kind of like oblivious to them in a way, but that are a result of how I grew up. I mean, we all grow up with certain beliefs that we've taken on from our family, and programming, we call it, where you've been programmed a certain way, and you bought into it. They say from till about 10 years old, you're really taking on you're a sponge. You're taking on the beliefs, the programming, the way life should be, the way people should be, who you should like, who you shouldn't like, all those things. And then from 10 on, you start acting out from that place. So you start being or acting out in the way that you did as in the family that you grew up in, or a culture that you grew up in. And so all of that just starts repeating itself, rinse and repeat. And without any grasping that this is what's going on. Now, the other thing can happen too, like it happened with me, like I don't ever want to be with my mother or want to be like my mother. But the truth is, I was actually reinforcing some of the beliefs or programs in a weird way, is the best way to say it. So, I just wanted to touch on this subject for now. I'd love to hear comments if any of you have been unfortunately, part of a emotionally abusive home, and how you've kind of struggled with this stuff or what you've done to get through it. I'd love to hear from you. And I want to continue on some of this conversation because, like I said, I think it's important, and I also think we don't give it enough time or enough looking at to help us kind of navigate through the life that we're in. You know, maybe I kind of think sometimes we think it's normal, but, you know, as you begin to, as an adult, meet other people and have conversations, you realize it isn't. When I told my husband all of my stories, it's like his jaw drops open. He did not grow up in an emotionally or verbal abusive home. They had their issues, but it just wasn't the same as I had. And so I realized, okay, that wasn't normal. But as a kid, you don't know, right? You just don't know. And so you kind of take it on. So, okay, I think I'll get off my soapbox, huh? And but I hope that this maybe caused some of you to take a look inside, and hopefully this is a topic that we can continue looking at and talking about, and I could do some interviews maybe with some people that have really dived into this in a deep way, and so that we can start to get a better handle on maybe what we can do to help ourselves. Okay, I hope that this has helped somebody. I hope this has opened up your mind to take a look at what's up for you. And I want to thank you so much for tuning in today. And we will talk soon again. By the way, if you liked the video, please click like. And if you're not a subscriber, please subscribe to my channel. And you can click that little bell next to the subscribe button, and that'll alert you as I have other videos coming up. So again, thanks guys for being here, and please take care. Now I'm going to see if I can get this clicker. I tend to have a problem clicking this thing off. Let me see if I can make it happen the first time. Nope.